The question is as moved by the Minister, Associate Professor Jamus Lim.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the three motions to contribute to the IMF's Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust, Crisis Capacity Development and Trusts for Special Poverty Reduction and Growth for HIPC initiatives is an important step toward contributing to the commons as responsible citizens in our global village. But I will go further. As a country that has historically hung its hat and been a major beneficiary from globalization, I would argue that doing so goes beyond a responsibility and is instead a duty and an obligation on our part. If anything, we are not doing enough, and I wish to explain why we should do more. I should, of course, state at the outset that I've previously worked for 7 years in the trenches as an economist in a Bretton Woods institution, and I maintain a small balance in my self-funded group retirement account and the staff account at the credit union. However, I do not receive nor maintain any direct financial interest in the bank nor the fund. Now, as members of this House are undoubtedly aware, despite our globalized footprint, Singapore has no foreign or development aid agency, and we do not, as a rule, channel any share of our budget toward official development assistance. Nor do we have any concerted strategy for increasing our representation at international organizations such as the UN. For instance, we send a total of 64 staff to the UN system, 0.1% of the total, or 0.001% of our population. Compare this to the 506 staff sent by Sweden, a country about twice our size, or the 559 sent by Denmark, with a population comparable to ours. Most of our citizens are narrowly affiliated with just two institutions, the IMF and the World Bank. Apocryphally, this position was motivated by our founding father, former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, who was reluctant to risk the brain drain that could result when our talents went abroad to work at these international institutions. Our legacy of ambivalence extends to our pocketbook. Remarkably, the official reason for our unwillingness to extend official aid is because, and I quote, Singapore is a developing country and does not provide official development assistance. We undertake South-South capacity building programs with other developing countries. The multiple rounds of assistance offered under the aegis of the Singapore Cooperation Program has undeniably been welcomed by other nations in need, but it is befuddling that we would remain unwilling to extend financial resources to other countries beyond merely technical assistance. To be fair, Singapore has also largely eschewed the receipt of foreign aid. But even so, historical development assistance inflows have come to a non-trivial amount. Statistics provided by the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD reports that between 1960 and 2004, Singapore received a total of $14.4 million US dollars every year on average. This amount, while uncorrected for inflation, nevertheless represents a net receipt of funds from the international community over the course of our modern history. What is more, Singapore may yet be set to receive an additional 5.33 billion US dollars or 7.17 billion Sing dollars worth in new SDR allocations were a new proposal by IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva be accepted by the IMF Executive Board. This amount actually far exceeds the comparatively small amounts that we are formally extending to the fund today. To be fair, foreign aid has a mixed record, and there is no clear evidence that foreign aid can reliably raise economic growth. Often, the reason is because of politics. Donor countries tie aid to specific requirements, which may not be the most beneficial use for the recipient country. Or the governments who receive such foreign aid become more responsive to their foreign benefactors as opposed to their own people. But by the same token, aid can be effective when it is conditional, albeit not by making it contingent on certain users specified by the donor, but by extending support to countries that we observe exercise good policy. Aid can also be channeled to responsible multilateral organizations with a good track record of ensuring that the funds they receive are properly utilized. And if we are still reticent to provide aid because it would be managed by external parties, we can always direct the funds toward the formation of an international volunteer corps, tasked to provide social and economic development assistance to other countries, especially those in ASEAN. So the key, as in all good investments, is to carefully direct our foreign aid dollars toward initiatives that take into account returns, but adjusted for risk. Indeed, countries such as Luxembourg and the United Kingdom demonstrate that it is possible to be simultaneously generous as well as principled in one's foreign aid practices. Now, let me be absolutely clear. Charity begins at home. We must take care of our own needs first, and we should prioritize these needs. In crisis times, this is even more pertinent as many Singaporeans are facing hard times, and it's difficult to convince them that we should be looking out for the well-being of those in other nations. And indeed, this impression is not unique. When citizens from countries around the world are asked how much they think their country contributes, they systematically overestimate this amount compared to actual disbursements. So we are certainly not unique in wanting to look out for ourselves first, and all the more during crisis times. But generosity has its own reward, and I believe that we are more than capable of doing both. We should not think that just because we are in crisis mode, we neglect planning for the future. And the future must surely entail thinking about the performance of economies besides our own. Because even from a purely self-interested perspective, uplifting our neighboring economies can pay dividends in the long run. After all, what we export shows up as another country's imports. When the economies in our region grow richer and faster, they will increase the demand for all goods, including exports from us. And when the incomes are elevated, their consumers are better able to afford our goods and services, which skew toward those of higher value. Generosity can also increase our soft power, our ability to influence the global agenda in ways that go well beyond our small size. Smaller nations understand this dynamic. The Netherlands and Switzerland and Qatar and the UAE know that they are able to punch above their weight because they have invested in multilateral organizations and in the international system. And if we establish a formal international volunteer corps, the experience gained by our returning volunteers will also contribute toward our goal of promoting greater sensitivity toward regional integration efforts. Given how citizens' perceptions are that donor governments give more than they actually do, it seems like a short logical step to infer that what they generally want is less, not more foreign aid. But this inference would be misleading. Somewhat surprisingly, the same study I referenced earlier also asked respondents how much aid they would like to see their countries giving. And these desired amounts actually fall short of how much donors' country citizens think is given, and far short of how much they actually give. The reason, I think, is because we are fundamentally social creatures, and some degree of reciprocity and altruism is baked into our moral fiber. We're often willing to help those less well off than we are, so long as we can afford it, and so long as we are assured that the money is well spent. But if we accept this premise, then I would submit that a more concerted effort to increase our official development assistance is essentially a problem to be resolved, rather than an insurmountable obstacle. Given the thrust of these overall remarks, then it should be no surprise, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I am wholly in favor of all three motions.